Greetings, and welcome back to LA Quill. Today we're diving into a deceptively simple question, one almost every writer asks at some point in their journey. Why should creative writers read? It sounds obvious, doesn't it? Writers read, of course they do. But when you're balancing world building and character arcs and drafting and editing and the entire emotional roller coaster of creation, reading can start to feel like a luxury, or worse, a distraction. So today, I want to break down why reading is not just helpful, but essential for your growth. Essential for your growth as a writer, especially if you're building fantasy worlds full of magic and monsters and political intrigue and deeply human characters. Whether you're crafting your first novel, exploring serialized stories, or simply trying to level up your narrative instincts, reading is the most powerful tool that you have at your disposal. And it's far more than just studying craft. It's nourishment, it's apprenticeship, it's inspiration, and it's research. It is the quiet but relentless force that shapes you into the writer you're becoming. Let's start with a simple truth many new writers don't realize until they've been at the keyboard for a while. Writing is more than putting words on a page. It's thinking and feeling and imagining, analyzing, experimenting, and absorbing. It's pulling threads from your mind and weaving them into something another human being can emotionally connect with. And that process becomes much easier and much richer when you read widely. Reading is exposure, and exposure is how creative minds grow. When you're reading fantasy, you're not just following a plot. You're absorbing how authors orchestrate tension, manage pacing, layer detail, reveal lore, handle dialogue, or make their magic systems feel lived in. When you read science fiction, you're absorbing clarity within complexity. When you read literary fiction, you're absorbing rhythm, voice, and emotional nuance. When you read thrillers, you're absorbing momentum and escalation. Even if those aren't your genres, the craft overlaps more than you think. Every story you read becomes another teacher, another mentor, another spark. And perhaps, most importantly, reading shows you what is possible. Writers often fall into a trap where they believe that they must invent completely original stories in a vacuum. They hold themselves to impossible standards of uniqueness, fearing that anything inspired by something they've read will be seen as derivative. But inspiration is not plagiarism. Influence is not theft. Every writer who has ever lived has drawn from stories around them, from myths and legends and poems and plays, fairy tales, history, and other novels. Reading doesn't contaminate your originality. It strengthens it. When you immerse yourself in the works of others, you start noticing techniques, solutions, and narrative pathways you might never have considered. You might see how other writers handle a hero's moral dilemma, or how they structure dual timelines, or how they reveal a villain's backstory at just the right moment. You note what resonates with you, and you note what doesn't. Your voice doesn't come from avoiding other voices. It comes from letting yourself interact with them. Now let's talk about something every writer knows intimately: the hunt for inspiration. Writing is an imaginative art, but imagination isn't just an infinite spigot that you can just turn on. Some days it trickles, and some days it's gushing. Some days it feels like dust. But reading, especially reading inside your chosen genre, well, that is one of the easiest and most enjoyable ways to refill that creative well. You're exposed to new ideas, new worlds, new characters, new archetypes, new emotional beats, new sensory textures. When you read with a writer's mind, you start to feel possibilities opening. A single line can launch a full scene in your head. A single setting description can spark an entire subplot. A minor character with an interesting quirk might make you wonder, what if someone like that existed in my world? And again, that is not theft. That is imagination doing exactly what it's meant to do: observing, transforming, and reshaping. Just as painters study other painters not to replicate but to learn how color and light and shadow can actually behave, writers study other writers to understand the tools of narrative. Reading gives you fuel. It reminds you why you love storytelling. It reminds you what stories can feel like when they resonate. And sometimes it's the spark that pulls you out of a creative slump. But reading isn't only about inspiration. Sometimes it's about education. And yes, here comes the dreaded R word, research. Fantasy writers especially tend to assume that because the worlds they're building are fictional, they can just invent everything from scratch. But the truth is, even the most fantastical stories are built upon real-world systems, physics, cultures, histories, and environments. If you have a character crossing a desert, you need to understand how deserts work. The climate, terrain, survival navigation, wildlife, temperatures, sandstorms, the sounds and silences of the landscape. Your reader can feel the difference between someone who's imagining a desert and someone who has studied one. When I wrote Ariana's Tale, I researched deserts so that the world could breathe. I researched extreme cold. I'm also Canadian, so extreme cold is not abnormal. But I researched extreme cold so I could understand the gully and the ice shelf. All of this matters. Writing Dragon's Tempest, I researched sailing because even a fantasy ship has to behave in a believable way. Researching through reading is one of the most powerful ways to enrich your writing. It also prevents world-building inconsistencies that might break immersion for some of your readers. And it allows you to write with more authority, more confidence, and more nuance. Even if your story takes place in a realm of dragons and magic and portals or ancient empires, grounding your world with research makes it feel real. And realism isn't the enemy of fantasy. It's what gives your fantasy weight. Well, we've talked about exposure, we've talked about inspiration, we've talked about research. But there's one more reason reading is critical for writers, and it's one that ties everything together. Reading shapes your instincts. When you read a lot, something interesting happens. You begin to internalize story structure. You begin recognizing emotional beats and turning points and rising tension and satisfying resolutions without consciously having to study them. You start noticing when dialogue feels stiff or when pacing lags. You see how character motivations intertwine with plot direction. You begin absorbing rhythm. Not just the rhythm of sentences, but the rhythm of storytelling itself. And once that rhythm becomes intuitive, your writing improves dramatically. You begin making better choices on the page without always realizing why those choices are working. You develop a feel for when to linger and when to move forward. A feel for how much detail is enough. A feel for when emotions should swell and when it should simmer. Reading rewires your creative instincts, and those instincts become part of your voice. A writer who does not read is like a musician who does not listen to music. It's possible to function, but your growth will be slower and narrower and far harder than it has to be. Now, let's address a concern many new writers share. What if reading other authors makes my work feel less original? The truth is, no story exists in isolation. Every novel you've ever loved was influenced by the stories that came before it. The question is not whether you'll be influenced. You will. The question is how you'll channel those influences. Reading widely ensures you aren't defined by a single story or a single voice. It prevents you from accidentally mimicking one author too closely. It gives you a broader palette. You build a foundation strong enough to support your own unique storytelling identity. You can't write in a vacuum and you're not meant to. Stories are a part of lineage, a conversation across time. Reading places you inside that conversation, so your writing can contribute something meaningful rather than echoing a single source. If you're an aspiring or intermediate fantasy author, here's what reading can specifically do for you. It teaches you how magical systems can be woven into character arcs. It reveals how other writers introduce and manage lore without overwhelming their readers. It shows you how complex political systems can be conveyed with clarity. It exposes you to a variety of different voices, from lyrical to gritty to epic to intimate. It deepens your understanding of pacing in long-form storytelling specifically. It demonstrates how emotional stakes can be threaded through massive world events. Reading is not just an activity, it's training. Some of the most enjoyable training you'll ever get. So, how should you read as a writer? First, read for joy. First and always. If reading becomes a chore, the benefits diminish. Let yourself enjoy the story as a reader first. Then, revisit it as a writer. Pay attention to what the book made you feel. Ask yourself, why did this scene work? Why did I love this character? Why did that twist land so well? Why did the pacing feel really tense or feel sluggish? Why did the world feel immersive? Do this gently without dissecting the magic out of the story. You still want to love it. But you're learning to read with two minds: the immersed reader and the observing creator. And the more you do this, the more those two minds will merge into a single powerful writerly instinct. Finally, I want to leave you with something important. Writing is a lonely art, but reading connects you to other storytellers across time and space. When you read, you're stepping into someone else's imagination, and that experience helps you enrich your own. It teaches you empathy. It teaches you craft. It teaches you possibility. Reading makes you a better writer. It also makes you a deeper human being. So the next time you feel guilty about curling up the book instead of sitting at your computer, remind yourself that this is the work. This is the training. This is the apprenticeship every writer needs. And that's our tale from L.A. Quill today. What books have inspired your writing lately? And why do you think they've worked so well for you? Until next time, may your stories always be magical.